"Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash!" Cynthia Halloway screamed this as her white BMW X5 barreled toward my pregnant heifers. The sound of her horn, a shrill European bleat, completely alien to this part of Texas, echoed across the pasture. My girls, heavy with calf and usually as placid as a summer pond, startled, their eyes wide with panic. They began to scatter, a dangerous thing for an animal that size, especially when they're expecting. She thought because she drove a $60,000 SUV and ran the homeowners association for the new ticky-tacky subdivision next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas, the deed is king, and my deed was written in 1940 on paper that had more character than she'd ever have. That screeching, entitled woman was the first domino in a chain of events that would lead me to spend over $50,000 on concrete and steel, and I swear to you, watching her life crumble into dust was worth every single penny. My name is Clay Mercer, and my family has worked this piece of dirt, the Riverside Ranch, for 4 generations. We don't have much, just 50 acres of rolling pasture that hugs a bend in Willow Creek, but it's ours. The deed, signed by my great-granddaddy, hangs in a frame over the fireplace. It's more than a legal document. It's a testament, a promise kept through droughts, floods, and economic busts. We raise Black Angus cattle, not for the mass market, but for breeding stock. My bulls, like our prize winner Blackjack, are worth more than her car, and my heifers carry the future of my family's legacy in their bellies. The quiet rhythm of this life is all I've ever known, or wanted. That rhythm was shattered the day they broke ground on the estates at Willow Creek. They clear-cut 100 acres of pristine post-oak savanna that bordered my eastern fence line. For a year, my peace was replaced by the constant groan of bulldozers and the whine of saws. Then the houses started going up, all beige stucco and faux Tuscan columns, crammed together so tight you could probably pass a cup of sugar through your neighbor's bathroom window. And with the houses came the people. People like Cynthia Halloway. She was the president of their newly formed HOA and, as I'd soon learn, the real estate agent who'd sold most of the properties. Our first real interaction happened a week before she tried to run down my livestock. I was mending a stretch of fence when her gleaming white Beamer pulled up, kicking dust all over my work boots. She rolled down the window, a cloud of cloyingly sweet perfume billowing out. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that sets my teeth on edge. "You'll need to move your fence." I stopped, took off my hat, and wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my glove. "Ma'am, this is my property line. Been here since before my daddy was born." She gave a little tinkling laugh, like I'd just told a charmingly stupid joke. "Oh, I know, bless your heart. But the access road to the community's private creekside park runs through here. My lawyer looked at the plats. It's a designated easement. You can't just block it off." I put my hat back on and stared at her, then at the dirt track she was referring to. It wasn't an access road. It was my private driveway, the path I used to get my tractor and truck down to the lower pasture and the creek for my cows. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your lawyer needs to learn how to read a survey. This is private property. There is no easement. The only community that has access to this road is the Mercer community, population 2, plus about 30 head of cattle." Her smile tightened. The fake polite mask slipped just a little. "Well, that's simply not what we were told. We have a right to access the creek. It was a primary selling point for the estates. I'll have my attorney send you a letter." She rolled up her window and sped off, leaving me in another cloud of dust. I thought that was the end of it. An ignorant city woman making a fuss. I was wrong. That was just the opening salvo. A few days later, I came down the track and found a heavy-duty bolt cutter lying in the grass next to my gate. The master lock, thick as my thumb, had been snipped clean in two. The gate was wide open. Beyond it, I could see fresh tire tracks, the distinctive tread of an expensive, oversized SUV, leading right down toward the creek. My blood ran cold. My herd was in that pasture. I jumped in my truck and followed the tracks. I found her down by the water, standing with a well-dressed couple, gesturing expansively at my land. "And as you can see," she was saying in her syrupy saleswoman voice, "you have exclusive private access to this gorgeous natural amenity, perfect for picnics, fishing. It's all part of the lifestyle here at the estates." I killed the engine and got out. The big diesel engine of my Ford, falling silent, made a noise all its own. The three of them turned, startled. The couple looked uncomfortable. Cynthia's face hardened. "This is private property," I said, my voice low and flat. "You are trespassing. And you cut my lock." The couple looked at each other, then back at Cynthia. "She told us this was community property," the man said, looking confused. "It is," Cynthia snapped, her composure cracking. She turned to me. "I told you we have an easement. You can't intimidate my clients." "Get off my land," I said, taking a step forward. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. The fury was radiating off me in waves. "Now, before I call the sheriff." She glared at me, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She hustled the couple back toward her car, muttering about crazy locals and legal action. I watched them leave, then spent the next hour walking the pasture, counting my cows, making sure none had wandered off through the open gate or gotten hurt. The violation of it sat in my gut like a lead weight. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated invasion. That evening, I told my wife Sarah what had happened. Sarah's a high school science teacher in town. She's the calm, rational one in our marriage, the voice of reason to my more stubborn, earthy instincts. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with worry. "She cut the lock, Clay? With buyers there?" "Bold as brass, honey. Stood there selling my creek like it was hers to give away." I slammed my fist on the kitchen table, making the salt shaker jump. "What kind of person does that?" "A desperate one, I'd guess," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But that doesn't make it right. What are you going to do?" "First thing tomorrow, I'm buying the thickest chain they sell at the hardware store and a new lock. And I'm putting up cameras. If she sets 1 foot on our side of that fence again, I'm going to have proof." The next day, I did just that. I installed 2 motion-activated trail cams, the kind hunters use, camouflaged against a pair of old oak trees, one aimed at the gate and one covering the path down to the creek. I hung a brand new, case-hardened chain and a lock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. I also added 3 new private property, no trespassing signs. Their bright red letters, a stark warning against the green landscape. It was a week later that the incident with the heifers happened. I was in the barn, checking on a new calf, when I heard the horn. It wasn't just a tap. It was a long, sustained, angry blast. Then another, and another. I ran out just in time to see Cynthia's BMW fishtailing on my dirt track, her horn blaring as she swerved around my herd, which she'd apparently found inconveniently blocking her path. My pregnant heifers, Daisy and Sweet Pea, were running, their movements clumsy and panicked. That's when I saw red. I didn't even think. I sprinted toward the fence line, vaulted over it, and stood in the middle of the road, blocking her path. She slammed on her brakes, skidding to a stop just a few feet from me. That's when she laid into me with the disgusting redneck trash line. Her face was contorted, purple with rage. I have a right to be here. My clients are waiting. Get these filthy beasts out of my way. I walked slowly to her driver's side window. She had it down, ready to scream some more. I leaned in, my shadow falling over her expensive leather interior. I spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper, but it cut through her tirade like a razor. This is the last time, I said. This is the last time you trespass on my land. This is the last time you endanger my animals. You see that gate? You see those signs? They apply to you. You are not welcome here. If I see this car or your face on my side of that fence again, you will regret it more than anything you have ever regretted in your life. Do you understand me? For the first time, I saw a flicker of actual fear in her eyes. The entitled rage was replaced by the shock of a bully who'd just been punched in the mouth. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Now get out, I said, straightening up, and don't ever come back. She fumbled the car into reverse, backed up clumsily, and sped away. I stood there, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, hard anger I hadn't felt in years. I turned to check on my herd. Most had settled down, but Daisy, one of my best heifers and due in a few weeks, was breathing heavily, her body trembling. The stress had been too much. She went into early labor that night. It was a long, difficult birth. The calf survived, but it was small and weak. Daisy was never quite the same. The vet said the stress-induced labor had taken a permanent toll. The vet bill was $700. The potential loss of a prize-winning heifer and her calf was in the thousands. But the real cost was the absolute certainty that had settled in my soul. There would be no more warnings. There would be no more polite conversations. Cynthia Holloway had declared war. And on my land, I don't lose wars. The next phase of her assault didn't come with a horn, but with a knock on the door. A week after the confrontation, a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit handed me an envelope. It was a lawsuit. Cynthia Holloway, on behalf of the estates at Willow Creek HOA, was suing me. The documents were a work of fiction, filled with legal jargon about prescriptive easements, historical community access, and my malicious obstruction of their rights. They were demanding I remove my gate and pay damages for denying them the access they'd promised their buyers. I read the whole thing sitting at my kitchen table, my coffee going cold. Sarah read it over my shoulder, her hand resting on my arm. "Can she do this?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "She can file whatever she wants, honey," I said, folding the papers with a sharp crease. "Doesn't make it true. She's bluffing. She's trying to scare us into giving her what she wants, because it'll cost a fortune to fight." I looked out the window at the rolling hills my great-granddaddy had bought with his life's savings. She's betting I don't have the stomach or the money for a legal battle. It's a bad bet. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to my cousin Ray, who's a surveyor. I explained the situation. He just laughed. "Clay, I've seen your plat a dozen times. That road is yours, lock, stock, and barrel. There's no more of an easement on it than there is on your front porch. But listen, the official county records are your best friend here. Don't just rely on your copy. Go down to the county clerk and pull everything. the original survey from 1940, every deed transfer, every single plat filed for that new subdivision. Leave no stone unturned. So that's what I did. For 3 days, I became a fixture at the county clerk's office. The air in there was thick with the smell of old paper and dusty microfilm. I meticulously went through the archives, my calloused fingers, more used to holding a wrench than a delicate document, carefully turning brittle pages. I found it on the second day, the original survey map. It was a beautiful piece of work, hand-drawn in India ink, the property lines laid out with artistic precision. And right there, clear as day, was my little dirt road labeled Private Farm Lane. There was no mention of an easement, no dotted lines indicating public access, nothing. Then I started digging into the estates at Willow Creek. I pulled their master plat, the one they filed with the county. It showed their property ending squarely at my fence line. Their own official documents, the ones they were legally bound by, showed they had absolutely no claim to my road. So why was Cynthia suing? Why was she so certain? The answer came from an unexpected source. Eddie, the mailman. Eddie's been delivering mail on our rural route for 30 years. He's a wiry man with a perpetual squint and a deep-seated hatred for developers. He'd seen this part of the county change from ranches and farms to gated communities, and he didn't like it one bit. He pulled up to my mailbox one afternoon, a few days into my research, and leaned out the window of his little white truck. "Heard that Holloway woman is giving you trouble, Clay," he said, handing me my mail. "You could say that, Eddie. She's suing me." Eddie spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dust. "Don't surprise me. The woman's a snake." He looked around, then lowered his voice. "You want to know what she's really up to?" He reached into a bag on his passenger seat and pulled out a glossy, trifold brochure. The front showed a smiling, impossibly happy family having a picnic next to a creek. My creek. The headline read, "The Estates at Willow Creek, where luxury meets nature." He opened it up. "Look here." He pointed to a bulleted list of exclusive community amenities. Right there, fourth on the list, it said, "Private gated access to Willow Creek for fishing and recreation." "She ain't just telling them they have access, Clay," Eddie whispered, his eyes glinting. "She's selling it. It's in the contracts. People are paying a premium for those lots on your fence line based on that promise. She's selling your road as an amenity." A cold, clear understanding washed over me. This wasn't just about her being an entitled jerk anymore. This was fraud. She had built her entire business model, the financial foundation of her development, on a lie. A lie that depended on my land. The lawsuit wasn't an offensive move. It was a desperate, Hail Mary attempt to retroactively legalize her scam. If she couldn't deliver that creek access, her sales contracts could be voided. She'd be open to lawsuits from every single person she'd sold a house to. That's when I knew I had her, I told Sarah that night, laying the brochure on the table next to the lawsuit and the copy of the 1940 survey. She's not just trespassing. She's committing fraud on a massive scale. Just as I was absorbing this, her harassment campaign kicked into high gear. She couldn't win in a straight fight, so she was going to try and bleed me out with 1,000 paper cuts. The first visitor was a man from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the TCEQ. He was polite but firm, holding a clipboard and explaining he was there to investigate an anonymous complaint about improper disposal of animal waste and toxic runoff from my ranch contaminating Willow Creek. I nearly laughed in his face. I run one of the cleanest small cattle operations in the state. I walked him through my whole setup. I showed him the containment ponds I'd built, lined and fenced, that collect all the runoff from the feeding areas. I showed him my composting system for the manure, which I later sell to local gardeners. I showed him my meticulous records of water quality tests that I perform myself every month. The agent, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was clearly impressed. After an hour, he took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Mr. Mercer, your operation is textbook. It's one of the most compliant I've ever seen. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. This complaint is baseless." He didn't have to say who filed it. We both knew. 2 days later, a truck from the county's Animal Services Department pulled up. A kind-faced woman got out and told me she was responding to an urgent complaint about starving and neglected livestock. This time, I did laugh. I led her out to the pasture where Blackjack, my 2,500-pound prize Angus bull, was contentedly chewing his cud. His coat was so black and glossy it shone in the sun. The rest of the herd was just as healthy. "Ma'am," I said, "my cows eat better than most people. These animals are my life's work. Does any one of them look neglected to you?" She smiled and shook her head. "They look beautiful, sir. I'll be sure to note that in my report. It's a shame folks use our services to settle grudges." The final visit was from a sheriff's deputy. He was a local boy, someone I'd known since he was in diapers. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Clay, I got a call about you making threats and causing a public disturbance." This time, I was ready. I invited him in, gave him a cold glass of sweet tea, and sat him down in front of my laptop. "Let me show you the public disturbance," I said. I played him the time-stamped footage from my trail cam. First, the video of Cynthia cutting my lock. Then, the video of her screaming at me from her car. And finally, the footage of her honking and swerving through my pregnant heifers. The deputy watched it all, his jaw tightening. "Well, damn, Clay. This tells a different story." He took down the details, made a copy of the video files onto a thumb drive, and wrote up a report. Legally, the trespassing is a civil matter unless the DA wants to press charges for the lock. But this is harassment. You keep documenting everything. Every phone call, every visit. It all matters. Cynthia's campaign of bureaucratic terrorism had failed. Every agency she'd sent after me had left validating my operation and filing a report against her for making a false claim. But she wasn't done. She was like a cornered rat, getting more vicious and more desperate. Her next move was to go public. I was cleaning a tack in the barn when Sarah called me, her voice trembling with anger. "Clay, turn on Channel 8. Now." I ran inside and flipped on the TV, and there she was, Cynthia Halloway, standing in front of my gate, giving an interview to a local news reporter. She'd managed to work up some crocodile tears. Her voice was thick with phony emotion as she painted a picture of a heartless, backward rancher holding an entire community of families hostage. "We just want to enjoy the nature that was promised to us," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "This was supposed to be a place where our children could play and connect with the outdoors. But this man," she pointed a trembling finger at my gate, "he's blocked our legal access out of pure spite. He's threatening us. We're all living in fear." The reporter, a young woman with a microphone, then turned to the camera. "A classic Texas standoff," she intoned gravely. "A new community's dream versus one man's iron-fisted control over what they say is a public right-of-way. We tried to speak with the rancher, Mr. Mercer, but he has so far refused to comment." "Refused to comment?" I roared at the TV. "They never even called me." I grabbed my phone and called the news station. I got a low-level producer who tried to brush me off, but I didn't let him. "You put a liar on TV to slander my name And you didn't even have the decency to get my side of the story, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Your reporter is at my gate right now. Tell her to stay put. I'm coming out, and I'm bringing my deed. I grabbed the framed deed from the wall, the fraudulent brochure from the table, and a copy of the county survey map. I marched out to the gate. The reporter looked surprised to see me. Cynthia looked like she'd seen a ghost. You want to comment? I said, holding up the documents. Here's my comment. This is the deed to the Riverside Ranch, in my family since 1940. This is the official county survey map showing my property line and a private farm lane. And this, I held up the glossy brochure, is the fraudulent marketing material Miss Halloway here is using to sell her houses, illegally promising access to my private land. She's not a victim. She's a con artist, and you're helping her sell her lies. The reporter's eyes widened. She looked from my documents to Cynthia's pale face. Her camera operator, sensing a real story, zoomed in on the papers in my hand. Cynthia started sputtering. He's lying. It's all doctored. He's a menace. I ignored her. I looked straight at the reporter. The truth is in the county clerk's office. It's all a matter of public record. Maybe you should try doing some actual reporting instead of just giving a platform to the person who cries the loudest. I turned and walked back to my house without another word. The story that aired that night was a lot more balanced. They showed my documents. They included my quote about her being a con artist. They even had a legal analyst who said that, based on the preliminary evidence, my claim appeared to be rock solid. But the damage was done. My name, the Mercer name, had been dragged through the mud on television. I had been portrayed as a villain in my own home. That night, I sat with Sarah in the quiet of our living room. The TV was off. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I had the lawsuit, the brochure, the pile of false reports, and a recording of the news story laid out on the coffee table. It was a mountain of evidence, a testament to her relentless assault. I'm done being polite, I said, my voice flat and hard. I'm done playing defense. I've tried reason. I've tried the law. She keeps coming. So now I'm going to finish this. Sarah looked at the cold fury in my eyes. What are you thinking, Clay? I'm thinking about the fund we have for the new bull. The $52,000 we've been saving up. I tapped a finger on the fraudulent brochure. She built her business on a lie about access. I'm going to make that lie a physical impossibility. I'm going to make it so permanent and so absolute that she will have no choice but to face the consequences of her fraud. I'm building a wall. Sarah was silent for a long moment, studying my face. She saw the exhaustion, the anger, but also the unshakable resolve. She reached out and put her hand on mine. You're planning something, she said. It wasn't a question. Good. This was the turning point. This was the moment I stopped reacting and started acting. Cynthia Halloway had pushed and pushed, thinking I was a simple man who would eventually fold. She had no idea that the simplest things in nature, rock, water, a man protecting his land, are often the most unmovable. She had started a war of paper and lies. I was going to end it with concrete and steel. And that is how a $52,000 wall started to take shape in my mind. A wall that would save my ranch and send a fraudster to the oblivion she so richly deserved. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor from hell or an HOA tyrant who thinks they own the world, you know the feeling. It's a slow burn that finally ignites into a fire. If you're enjoying seeing this particular nightmare get a dose of what's coming to her, do me a favor and smash that like button. Stick around, because the story of this wall is just getting started, and you're going to want to see how it ends. My first call the next morning was to a man named Mike, but everyone in the county just called him Big Mike. Big Mike was a contractor who specialized in foundations, retaining walls, and anything else that required tons of over-engineered concrete. He was a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it had its own ecosystem and a habit of spitting tobacco juice with pinpoint accuracy. More importantly, he had a deep philosophical hatred for homeowners associations and entitled people who moved to the country and immediately tried to change it. I met him at the fence line, right where my private lane met the public road. I laid out the whole story: the trespassing, the lawsuit, the fraud, the harassment. I showed him the brochure and the survey map. He listened to the whole thing without saying a word, just nodding slowly, a storm cloud gathering on his brow. When I was done, he spat a brown stream that landed squarely on the thistle growing by the fence post. "So this BMW driving witch," he rumbled, his voice like gravel turning in a cement mixer, "is selling access to your road, suing you for blocking it, and calling the law on you for existing, all while standing on a foundation of pure bull." "That about sums it up, Mike," I said. "And you want to, shall we say, permanently clarify the property line for her." "I want to build a monument to the sanctity of a deed," I told him. "I want something that says no in a language a freight train can understand. I want it tall, I want it thick, and I want it ugly." A slow grin spread across Big Mike's face. It was a terrifying sight. "Clay, my friend, you have come to the right place. We ain't going to build you a fence. We're going to build you a fortress. 12 feet high, 1.5 feet thick, steel rebar grid on 1-foot centers, deep poured concrete footings that go down 4 feet. Even a tank ain't getting through this. It'll be my masterpiece." My next stop was the county permits office. I knew Cynthia would be watching, ready to throw up any legal roadblock she could. I couldn't just file for a fence permit. She'd challenge it on zoning or aesthetic grounds. But my cousin Ray, the surveyor, had given me another piece of invaluable advice. He'd pointed me to a little-known state statute, Section 251 of the Agriculture Code. It was designed to help ranchers protect their herds from biosecurity threats, disease, and vandalism. It allowed for the construction of agricultural security barriers. These weren't classified as residential fences. They were agricultural structures, and as such, they were exempt from most local zoning ordinances and completely outside the jurisdiction of a residential HOA. I walked into the office and filed the application. The clerk, a woman named Doris who had known my family for years, read the application and looked up at me over her glasses. "Agricultural security barrier, huh, Clay? Getting some trouble from the new neighbors?" "Just want to make sure my herd stays healthy, Doris," I said with a straight face. She stamped the application with a satisfying thud. "Permit will be ready for pickup in 48 hours. Good luck to you." The final piece of the puzzle was timing. I wanted maximum impact. I wanted to detonate this bomb right in the middle of Cynthia's life. Once again, my unofficial intelligence agent, Eddie the mailman, provided the key. He flagged me down a few days later, his eyes alight with conspiratorial glee. "Big doin's over at the estates next weekend," he said, handing me a postcard. It was an invitation to the grand opening sales event. She's got a dozen prospective buyers flying in from Houston and Dallas. Caterers, a string quartet, the whole 9 yards. From what I hear, this is it. She's deep in debt from the construction loans, and she's got to close these sales or the whole house of cards comes down. It was perfect. Her make or break weekend. I called Big Mike. "Mike, we're a go for next Friday. Dawn." "The armies of concrete shall be marshaled," he growled into the phone. "It will be glorious." That Friday morning, the sun had barely kissed the horizon when the first roar echoed across the valley. It wasn't a rooster crowing. It was the air brakes of a massive concrete mixer. It was followed by another, and another. A convoy of heavy machinery rumbled down the county road and staged right at the entrance to my lane. 3 mixers, a pumper truck with a giant articulated arm, a flatbed carrying a mountain of rebar and wooden forms, and Big Mike's crew of grim-faced, muscle-bound artisans. The noise was apocalyptic. It was beautiful. As predicted, it didn't take long for the Queen to emerge from her castle. Cynthia Halloway came storming out of her house, which was just up the road inside her subdivision. She was wearing a silk bathrobe and slippers, her hair a mess, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "What in God's name is going on?" she shrieked, marching right up to Big Mike's foreman. "You can't do this! You're blocking the road!" The foreman, a guy built like a refrigerator, just looked down at her and pointed a thumb toward a wooden stake hammered into the ground right at the edge of the pavement. Tacked to it, protected in a plastic sleeve, was a copy of my freshly issued permit for an agricultural security barrier. Cynthia glanced at it and scoffed. "This is ridiculous! It's a forgery! I'm calling the police!" "Ma'am, you do that," the foreman said, turning his back on her to direct the pumper truck into position. She did. 20 minutes later, the same deputy I'd shown the videos to pulled up. He got out of his car, sighed heavily, and walked over to where Cynthia was having a full-blown meltdown. "He's building a wall! He's trying to ruin my open house!" she screamed at the deputy. The deputy calmly walked over to the stake, read the permit carefully, and then walked back to her. "Ma'am, this is a legal, permitted construction project on Mr. Mercer's private property. If you interfere with it in any way, I will have to arrest you. I suggest you go back to your house." The look on her face was a priceless cocktail of shock, impotence, and rage. She was used to authorities she could manipulate. She had just run into one she couldn't. She stood there, sputtering, as the first boom of the pumper truck extended over the property line and began to pour a thick, gray slurry of concrete into the deep trench my new wall would call home. Defeated, she finally retreated, but not before screaming one last promise. "My lawyer will hear about this." All weekend, her grand open house was an unmitigated disaster. The string quartet was drowned out by the roar of engines and the shouts of construction workers. The scent of expensive catering was overpowered by the smell of diesel exhaust and wet concrete. Prospective buyers who drove up to the estates were greeted not by a vision of tranquil country living, but by the chaotic, noisy, and frankly intimidating spectacle of a massive wall being erected. I saw her through my binoculars, trying desperately to salvage the situation. She'd lead a couple out onto a balcony and gesture toward the hills, and they'd just point down at the construction site with confused looks on their faces. I saw her making frantic phone calls, her face getting paler with each one. Eddie later told me that not a single person made an offer that weekend. 2 of the buyers who were already in contract demanded to know what was going on with the private creek access they'd been promised. By Sunday evening, the work was done. The forms were stripped away to reveal a brutalist masterpiece. It stood 12 feet tall, 100 feet long, a sheer, unclimbable, unbroken slab of steel-reinforced concrete. It was gray, ugly, and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Big Mike had even embedded a small, professionally made metal plaque in the center that read, "Private Property, Riverside Ranch, established 1940. Where the flimsy gate and her imaginary easement had once been, there was now a solid, immovable fact. My new gate, an industrial-grade sliding steel behemoth that weighed half a ton, was set 20 feet back on my property, accessible only by a keypad to which only Sarah and I knew the code. The quiet that descended on the ranch that evening was the most profound peace I'd felt in a year. The war was over. The border was sealed. I was wrong. The war wasn't over. The final, desperate battle was yet to come. Monday morning, I was enjoying a cup of coffee on my porch, watching the sun rise over my beautiful, ugly wall. The silence was glorious. Then I heard it. The high-pitched whine of an engine being pushed to its absolute limit. I looked up and saw Cynthia's white BMW X5. It was at the far end of the county road, but it was coming fast. She wasn't just driving, she was aiming. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. She had completely and utterly snapped. All the pressure, the debt, the failed open house, the public humiliation, it had all coalesced into this one insane, suicidal charge. She was flooring it, her car a white missile aimed directly at the spot where the gate used to be. She was going to ram my wall. I didn't even have time to stand up. I just sat there, coffee cup in hand, and watched. The impact was not the explosive crash you see in movies. It was a sickening, final-sounding thud. A percussive crunch of metal and plastic giving way to something infinitely harder. The front end of the $60,000 BMW accordioned, crumpling like a wad of paper tossed in the trash. The hood buckled upwards, the windshield spiderwebbed into a million pieces, and the airbags deployed with a violent poof. The engine, pushed back into the firewall, let out a final hiss of steam and died. The car, or what was left of it, sat there, embedded in my wall, utterly destroyed. And the wall? It was perfect. There wasn't a crack. There wasn't a chip. There was only a faint, crescent-shaped smear of white paint to mark the point of impact. My high-definition security camera, nestled in a nearby tree, captured the whole, pathetic, glorious spectacle in crystal-clear 4K. I calmly took a sip of my coffee. Then I picked up my phone and dialed 911. "Yes," I said to the dispatcher. "I'd like to report a motor vehicle accident. A car has hit a stationary object on my property. Yes, there are injuries. Mostly to the car's ego, I think." When the deputy arrived, the same poor guy, yet again, the scene was almost comical. Cynthia was stumbling out of her wrecked car, dazed, with airbag powder on her face, screaming that I had tried to kill her. The deputy just looked at the car, then at the massive, immovable wall it was lodged in, then back at her. He looked over at me, still sitting on my porch. I just gave him a little nod. "Ma'am, did you intentionally drive your vehicle into this wall?" he asked, his voice weary with the sheer stupidity of the situation. "He put it there. It's an illegal obstruction. He assaulted me with his wall," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. I walked down from the porch, holding a tablet. "Deputy," I said calmly, "before you write your report, you might want to see this." I played him the video. The long, clear shot of her car accelerating, the deliberate line she took, the undeniable intent of the act. He watched it, shook his head, and put the tablet down. He turned to Cynthia. "Ma'am, you're lucky to be alive, and right now you're being charged with reckless driving and felony destruction of property. Since the property you destroyed appears to be your own, that's the good news. The bad news is, I'm taking you in for a psychological evaluation." As they led her, sobbing and raving, to the back of the squad car, I knew I finally had all the pieces. The fraud evidence, the stack of harassment reports, and now the video of her final, unhinged act of desperation. It was time to stop just defending the line. It was time to burn her whole world to the ground. The plan for her final downfall came together like a well-oiled machine. First, My lawyer, a sharp-tongued old country attorney named Ben, drafted up packets of evidence. Each one contained a copy of the estate's marketing brochure, a copy of my deed and survey, a sworn affidavit from me detailing the harassment, and a link to the video of Cynthia's car becoming one with my wall. Second, we had to find her victims. Using public property records, we got the names of the 5 families who had already closed on their homes, and the dozen others who were under contract. Ben sent a carefully worded letter to each of them, explaining that the private creek access they had been sold was, in fact, a fraudulent claim, and that they were victims of real estate fraud. He invited them to join a class action lawsuit we were preparing. The response was immediate and furious. Third, I called the district attorney's office. I didn't ask for a junior prosecutor. I asked to speak directly to the head of the Economic Crimes Division. I sent him the entire package, including the names of the other victims who were now cooperating. I highlighted the fact that this was not a simple civil dispute, but a pattern of deliberate interstate wire and mail fraud. The final piece was public accountability. The stage had to be perfect. The county was holding its annual town hall meeting in 2 weeks, a televised event where citizens could air their grievances to the county commissioners. It was the perfect venue. I called the news reporter from Channel 8, the one who had initially run the smear piece, but had then tried to correct it. I have the end of the story for you, I told her. Town hall, 2 weeks. Be there. You won't want to miss it. The night of the town hall, the auditorium was packed. The county commissioners sat on a raised dais, looking bored. The TV cameras were set up in the back. I saw Cynthia Halloway sitting in the 3rd row. She looked haggard. Her arm was in a sling from the accident, and her face was a pasty, stressed-out gray. She was there, I assumed, to try and plead her case to the commissioners, to paint herself as the victim of county bureaucracy and redneck aggression one last time. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. I sat in the back with Sarah, waiting. When the floor was open for public comment, I was the first one to the microphone. Good evening, commissioners, I began, my voice steady and clear, echoing through the auditorium. My name is Clay Mercer. My family owns the Riverside Ranch, just east of town. I saw Cynthia flinch at the sound of my name. She turned in her seat, her eyes wide with alarm. I'm here tonight to talk about economic development and property rights. For the last year, a new development, the Estates at Willow Creek, has been a neighbor of mine. It was sold to good, hard-working families with a promise of a certain lifestyle. I nodded to Sarah, who was standing by a projector. The first image flashed up on the big screen behind the commissioners. It was the cover of Cynthia's glossy brochure. This was the promise, I continued, my voice rising. A promise of exclusive, private, gated access to Willow Creek. A beautiful promise. The only problem, the next slide came up, a high-resolution image of my deed from 1940, is that the land they sold access to was never theirs to sell. It belongs to me. The next slide was the county survey map, with the private farm lane clearly highlighted in yellow. A low murmur went through the crowd. I could see the commissioners leaning forward, suddenly very interested. Cynthia was frozen in her seat, her face ashen. The developer and real estate agent for the estates, Ms. Cynthia Halloway, I pointed directly at her, built her entire business on this lie. When I refused to grant her fictitious easement, she didn't apologize. She didn't correct her mistake. She launched a campaign of harassment. Slide after slide flashed on the screen. The TCEQ report. Finding My Ranch textbook. The Animal Services report. Calling My Cattle Beautiful. The Sheriff's report on her harassment. The crowd was silent now, captivated. The TV cameras were all focused on me, then panning to get a shot of Cynthia's horrified face. She sued me, I went on, my voice like iron. She slandered me on the news. And when all of that failed, when her lies were exposed and her business was crumbling, she did this. The final slide was a still frame from the security camera video, the white BMW crumpled against my wall. She tried to physically destroy a 12-foot steel-reinforced concrete wall with her car. This is not the action of a reasonable business person. This is the action of a cornered criminal. I paused, letting the image sink in. There are people in this room tonight who bought homes from Miss Halloway based on her fraudulent promises. Their investments are at risk. Our county's reputation is at risk when we allow predators like this to operate within our borders. This isn't a simple neighbor dispute. This is fraud, and it needs to stop. I finished and stepped away from the microphone. The room was utterly silent for a moment, and then a smattering of applause started, growing into a full-blown ovation. As I walked back to my seat, I saw them. 2 men in suits and a uniformed officer were walking down the center aisle. They weren't looking at me. They were walking straight toward the third row. They stopped right at Cynthia's seat. One of the men leaned down. "Cynthia Halloway," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stunned silence. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of felony real estate fraud and wire fraud." The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Cynthia let out a strangled sob as the officer pulled her to her feet. The cameras flashed, their bright lights illuminating her tear-streaked, devastated face. She was no longer the powerful HOA president in a luxury car. She was just a common criminal, exposed and defeated. As they led her past me up the aisle, her eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was no anger left in them, just a hollow, empty void. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I just felt quiet. I stood there, leaning against the back wall of the auditorium, my arm around Sarah. The news reporter rushed over to me, her microphone extended. "Mr. Mercer, do you have a statement?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. I handed it to her. "Here," I said. "This is a copy of my deed, a copy of the restraining order I was granted this morning, and a thumb drive with the full, unedited video of her ramming my wall. I think that's statement enough." The aftermath was swift and total. Cynthia Holloway's real estate empire collapsed overnight. Faced with a mountain of evidence and testimony from a dozen angry homeowners, she took a plea deal. She was convicted, sentenced to 3 years in state prison, and ordered to pay millions in restitution. She lost her real estate license, her reputation, and her freedom. The last I heard, she was serving her time in the Gatesville unit. Her company went into bankruptcy. The Estates at Willow Creek was taken over by a receiver and eventually sold to a more reputable local builder who immediately met with all the homeowners, apologized for the fraud, and redrew the community plans to include a proper park on their own land, far from my fence line. The new HOA president is a retired engineer who sends me a Christmas card every year. My life returned to its peaceful rhythm. The mornings are quiet again, broken only by the sound of my cattle lowing in the pasture. The $52,000 from the bull fund was gone, but it was the best money I ever spent. It bought me peace. It bought me justice. Sometimes, when I'm driving the tractor down the private lane, I'll stop and look at the wall. It's not pretty. The gray concrete is already stained by weather. But to me, it's a thing of beauty. It's a permanent reminder that in this world, you can't build a life on lies. It stands as a silent, unmoving testament to the fact that you don't mess with a man's family. you don't mess with his animals, and you sure as hell don't mess with his land. They say good fences make good neighbors. That might be true, but sometimes when you're dealing with something more predator than neighbor, you need more than a fence. Sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. And that is how a $52,000 wall saved my ranch and sent a fraudster to jail. If you love seeing entitled nightmares get a dose of concrete justice, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd smash that like button and subscribe for more stories from the ranch. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had a neighbor from hell that pushed you to your absolute limit? I've got a feeling I'm not the only one.